Welcome to another year of the RELX SDG Inspiration Day. I'm so excited to be here with you again, where we're going to be talking about nature and biodiversity. As many of you know, this is at the heart of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But we all know that biodiversity is in decline. The world is losing species. The aim of today is to inspire, motivate, and mobilize. Collaboration is key to the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we are here to facilitate those conversations. Now, our first guest of the day, Dr. Claire Melamed, is the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. We have a question for you, which is, what is the status of the SDGs, particularly in relation to nature and biodiversity? And what should our actions be in the next 7 years to 2030?
So this year, there's going to be a huge effort by the UN, by all the member states, to really use this halfway point to mobilize action, to draw attention to the numbers, which of course is my business in the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Not great news, I'm afraid to say. Of the 140 targets, those 17 goals are subdivided into targets of things that are actually measurable. Only 12%, so that's just over 1 in 10, are actually moving forward at the speed that is needed to get to where we want to be by 2030. 50%, they're moving forward a bit, or maybe they're kind of static. And then the worst news of all, 30% actually either not moving at all, or in some cases going backwards. So the two things that underpin the kind of good decision making at all sections of society that is really going to be needed to overcome this crisis are a solid investment in the foundations, in the resources, and in the data and information that are needed to build some of these basic systems that I'm always an optimist, and I believe will get us through.
And now I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker. Márcia is the founding director of corporate responsibility at RELX. She is chair of the UN Global Compact Network UK, chair of the Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability Council of the Conference Board, and a founding member of the board of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. She's also the founding director of London Museum and educational facility Benjamin Franklin House.
Indeed, as Claire said, the statistics that illustrate biodiversity loss are distressing. Climate change, with a doubling of greenhouse gas emissions since 1980, and the raising of average global temperatures by at least 0.7 degrees Celsius, is already affecting species and ecosystems around the world, particularly those most vulnerable, including coral reefs, mountains, and polar ecosystems, with indications that climate change-induced temperature rise may threaten as many as 1 in 6 species at the global level. The need for collaboration is at the heart of this gathering today, virtually from around the world. We can't let fear or resignation lead to inaction. This could not be a more critical time to act. We need inspiration in the work ahead on biodiversity, and there could be no one more inspiring to join us this morning here in London and around the world where we are than Ban Ki-moon, 8th United Nations Secretary General. His efforts led to the landmark Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which we are focusing on today. He currently serves as co-chair of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, which seeks to empower youth and women to become active global citizens in creating a sustainable future for all.
The impacts of climate change are felt everywhere, yet they are predominantly caused by the most privileged and disproportionately affect the most vulnerable people. Climate change is an urgent matter, and it is especially affecting biodiversity. I believe it is vital that businesses firstly identify their full environmental impact starting with a clear understanding of the organization's impact on the whole of the environment, not exclusively their carbon emissions and pollution. Secondly, there must be a stronger emphasis on evaluating business risks and opportunities related to nature and biodiversity, as well as more comprehensive guidelines and transparency on this process. Finally, I strongly believe that businesses must prioritize goal setting and awareness raising around their individually designed goals and targets, and always consider the way forward regarding effective and innovative nature-based solutions. As I said before, there can be no plan B because there is no planet B. And therefore, more than ever, we need your leadership, we need your dedication, and we need your action. Thank you.
And now it's time for us to introduce some experts to provide their thoughts on the day. We're going to start off with Juliette Pugliesi, who is the nature manager at BSR. Juliette worked at the WWF, where she supported companies on their nature issues, biodiversity, forest, climate, freshwater.
Our whole economy relies on nature. No more bees and no more pollination means no more coffee and no more jam. Globally, OECD has estimated that these services are worth around 125 to 140 trillion USD per year. Businesses are just starting to get more and more mature on climate issues, but also understand that nature loss is already threatening their business model. In fact, nature and climate are two sides of the same coin. The latest scientific findings prove that climate and nature are intertwined. One crisis cannot be solved without addressing the other. Recently, the IPCC synthesis report indicated that nature is a solution to a significant portion of climate change mitigation and adaptation. We need to work on more resilient businesses because there is absolutely no business on a dead planet.
And I'm excited to introduce our second guest today, Eva Zabey, who is the CEO of Business for Nature. It's a global coalition of 80 influential organizations and forward-thinking companies calling for governments to adopt policies to reverse nature loss in this decade.
So is it too late? No, but we're really cutting it close. We have the methodologies, the experience, the expertise. We know what needs to happen. We know how to do it. But now we need to scale and speed up action. And the way we're going to be able to do that is by increasing the policy ambition. The 4 high-level actions all companies can do is assess their most material impacts and dependencies on nature. Number 2, commit to setting science-based targets for nature. 3, transform your business by avoiding and reducing any negative impacts, and then restoring and regenerating. The nature agenda is a positive agenda. And then 4, disclose on all of this. But the scale of what we're talking about means we need all businesses of every size, from every sector, from every geography, to step up and have courage. We need all companies to assess, commit, transform, disclose, and to put in place a strategy. No one of us is being asked to solve this alone, but every one of us is being asked to contribute, because either we'll all reach a nature positive world by 2030 or none of us will. It's the ultimate joint effort for nature and humanity.
Now we have a panel, and the panel is going to be exploring the legal case for biodiversity. And our moderator for today is Justin Webb, who has been a foreign correspondent for the BBC for many years and covered a number of the wars, be it the Gulf and Bosnia, the breakup of the Soviet Union. Is a presenter of the Today program on Radio 4, is a regular writer on US affairs for The Times and the Unheard website.
Shall I go ahead and introduce our panelists now, because they're just popping up. I can see them popping up on my screen, so they'll be popping up on yours as well. And we've got some absolutely perfect people to talk about all of this. Lara Dubasidis is environment and human rights lawyer with the Legal Policy and Research Unit at the International Bar Association. Videsha Prithviraj is CEO and chair of the board of legal technology company LexisNexis South Africa, and it's particularly interesting, I think, to involve companies in all of this. Gayatri Raman is managing director of LexisNexis for Southeast Asia. We've also got with us Simi Payne, who is chair of the Ocean Law Specialist Group of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and an associate professor as well at Rutgers University. So welcome to you all. When we talk about legal rights, and we'll talk about the legal rights that people have in a moment, can we start with nature itself? Does nature exist in legal terms?
So some countries are actually beginning to formally give legal rights to nature. In New Zealand, there's a river that has been given legal rights with human guardians appointed. It's not common. I think what we might more commonly see is taking nature as thinking about it in ecocentric terms, not anthropocentric terms, and having human laws that protect those ecocentric values.
For me, it really comes down to sustainability. And if I think of the earth, I think of it as a macro ecosystem. And then we've got all these micro ecosystems. And human beings are part of these these micro ecosystems as well. So, at the end of the day, in order for the earth to survive and to be sustainable, and for humans to actually continue on this planet, in addition to every other species, we have to give nature the right to survive, to thrive, to evolve, to regenerate. So for me, when I think about the rights of nature, it's, the right to existence, the right to regenerate, the right to restore itself, the right to protection. Somewhere around that, because it is living, it has to have the rights to legal representation.
Many of us, companies, governments, still see nature as an asset. So when you see nature or the environment as assets, you think of the need to manage these assets. But once you look at nature and you view nature as having a legal personhood, and with its own set of rights, then nature has a very different kind of persona and personality.
The law, as it is the finance around it, and the understanding of the ethical obligations that lawyers have, I think, in advising fairly and appropriately conceptualizing risk, which is based on the best available science. And of course, the science is settled largely enough. So in terms of how it's shifting, I'm optimistic. I'm often outraged, but I'm optimistic.
It's been absolutely fascinating, really educative for me. Brilliant. Thank you all so much.
And now we've got our speakers corner. And our first speaker is Miriam Mujawamariya, who is a lecturer at the University of Rwanda in forest ecology and biodiversity science.
Myself and the team, we focus on native trees and how they respond to climate change, where we are trying to find out the suitability of different tree species to different regions of the country. We are trying to help Rwanda to become resilient to the ongoing climate change, whereby by choosing the right tree to the right region, then Rwanda will be able to face the threats that are caused by climate change. And we have a sample of 20 tree species which are grown along elevation gradient in Rwanda, and the highest elevation, which is nearby the mountain tropical forest, and that is like a control site. We also have the intermediate site and the lower elevation, which is also warmer and drier site. A step down in elevation represent a possible climate warming scenario.
I'm excited to introduce to you Ankur Patwardhan, Ankur Padwadhan is an associate professor and entrepreneur. He's currently heading the Anna Saheb Kulkarni Department of Biodiversity at the Savitribai Phule Pune University in India.
Ecosystem services are the benefits mankind accrues from the ecosystem, and pollination is one of the most important ecosystem service. A closer look at Intergovernmental Panel report on biodiversity and ecosystem services reveals the link between the health of pollinator populations and global food security. The crops which are dependent on animal for pollination has increased by 300 times. And if you can see some of the figures, then nearly 90% of the flowering plants, they are animal pollinated. It is estimated that 200,000 species, they provide service as a pollination animal species. And out of these 200,000, more than 95% are insects. Ecosystems are nothing but like a game of Jenga. So you remove the pollinators from the ecosystem, and the entire ecosystem will come crashing down. So it will be a bottom-up trophic cascade, and the effects will be perceived upwards, not only to the other higher taxa, but also to the humans. So I decided to use the time judiciously. And what we did, that myself and my team, we are working in the Western Ghats Biodiversity Hotspot, and we studied preference of different pollinators to certain plant species. I was thinking, how should I continue my research in the COVID period? And my terrace has now become my living lab. We conduct all sorts of pollination experiments and color preferences and other things on my terrace. As long as we keep on protecting Mother Earth is going to protect our generation and future generation as well.
Now we have an exciting part, and this is where we give the RELX SDG Customer Impact Awards. It's an incredible initiative that aims to recognize customers who share RELX's commitment to driving action in support of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And now I would like to introduce to you Rose Thompson, the Chief HR Officer of RELX, who will be presenting the two awards.
The first recipient of the RELX SDG Customer Impact Award 2022 is Solvay. Solvay is a global leader in materials, chemicals and solutions, and they've been nominated by Elsevier for their commitment to solving critical industrial, social and environmental challenges. I would now like to introduce Pascal Chavon-Demasset, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Solvay, to accept the award and to tell us more about the work that Solvay is doing to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
When we launched our Solvay One Planet roadmap, we defined a biodiversity goal, which was a global one. It was to reduce pressure on biodiversity across the value chain. I always believe that the secret to be successful in biodiversity, not only having a global action, but through local actions too. Rather than having a top-down list of actions, we have developed individual roadmaps that take into account the unique needs of each site in order to become nature positive. So thank you again for RELX SDG for this customer award, which inspires us and our employees and helps us maintain great momentum. Let's say, each of our industrial sites a place where biodiversity can develop.
So the next award goes to Panasonic, and they've been nominated by LexisNexis Legal and Professional for their Green Impact Initiative, which aims to reduce CO2 emissions by more than 300 million tonnes by 2050 across their own value chain and the ripple effect of energy transformation on society. Panasonic are unable to join us today due to the horrendous time difference with Japan, but they send their sincere thanks for the award and for the recognition of their commitment to advancing SDG 7, Affordable and Clean Energy, SDG 9, Industry, Innovation and Infrastructure, and SDG 13, Climate Action.
The next panel is going to be exploring the pathways between biodiversity and human health. And our moderator is Dr. Josephine Gibson, who is the deputy editor at the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health.
So yeah, this session is going to be addressing the question of less biodiversity, more disease, but I'm not on my own. I'm joined by a fantastic panel, and I'll introduce you one by one. Here they pop up on our screens. First, we have Dr. Lewis Collins. So Lewis did his doctoral and postdoctoral research in Antarctica, and that has sharpened his focus on environmental change. Lewis now works in the publishing world, like I do. So next we've got Dr. Gladys Kalema-Zikusoka. So Gladys is founder and CEO of Conservation Through Public Health. Gladys has a veterinary background, graduating from the Royal Veterinary College here in London. She established Uganda Wildlife Authority's first veterinary department and has built her research on disease within the human, livestock, wildlife interface through masters and residencies in veterinary science. Virginia Gardner is the inventor and CEO of Luwat toilet system. So her company creates sustainable toilets with waterless flush technology that can capture odor and convert waste into electricity, biogas, and fertilizer. Virginia developed this technology during her master's degree in innovation design engineering. Before founding Luwat in 2010, Virginia spent her time in various director and management roles in product and design companies focused on environment and human health. And finally, Dr. Esther Kanduma is senior lecturer and animal health scientist based in the University of Nairobi in Kenya. Esther has 2 decades of teaching, research, and public engagement experience, and her interests in research revolve around epidemiology, control, and management of animal diseases, particularly in tick-borne diseases. Can I have your thoughts on how biodiversity impacts human health?
I think human health, human well-being, and in many cases human livelihoods, which I don't think we should overlook, are dependent on services that are provided by the natural world. These ecosystem services, as they're often called, provide us with food, water. They help to regulate the cleanliness of our air, our local climate conditions, and they keep the spread of pathogens in check. They also provide materials that many industries and livelihoods depend on. So we're very much dependent on these services in nature.
There's been a lot of emphasis on zoonotic disease from animals to people, but there is also that element of zoonotic diseases jumping from people back to animals. And especially those that we're so closely related to, like the great apes, where we share over 98% genetic material. We have seen cases of that happening in Uganda and other countries in Africa and also Southeast Asia. So it's important to look at it both ways, because if animals are not healthy, people won't be healthy. And if people aren't healthy, animals won't be healthy. And the environment, the biodiversity is an interface where, you can have contaminated water, and where people and animals meet, all those sources can be contaminated.
When we maintain a stable ecosystem, then we are able to maintain also a stable ecosystem for example, disease vectors. There is usually a natural reservoir for this, pathogen, and there is also a natural reservoir for this vector. So if you want to maintain a stable disease condition, then you need to maintain a stable ecosystem, a stable ecology, because when you disrupt this, then you disrupt the disease cycles. And this is a problem. I think each of these organisms has a role to play, in the ecosystem. They will, if the natural reservoir is not there, they'll have to find another natural reservoir. So we have all evolved, humans, animals, and plants. We have all co-evolved, to live with each other.
The overall importance of sanitation in the Sustainable Development Goals is quite well documented. And a recent study from the University College London has shown that by improving sanitation, you actually impact all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's a really important role for it to play. The reality is that by not dealing with it, we are absolutely creating havoc on biodiversity, especially in freshwater ways and also seawater and ocean environments. I think that sanitation just is intrinsically linked to biodiversity. Really being aware of that, and also thinking about how we can more optimally have what we produce be part of the cycle in the world around us. It's something that many people have been thinking about for a long time. It's not straightforward. There's many, many complex challenges to it, but it's an absolutely central part of maintaining biodiversity in the world.
We come to our next segment of second set of customer awards. I'm going to announce our presenter of this award, who is Nick Loft. He is the CFO of RELX.
The winning customer nominated by RX is Silverback, which comprises Silverback Films and Studio Silverback. They have worked on films and series that have been among the most successful ever produced, including the video of Sir David Attenborough's address at COP26 and the 5-part documentary series Earthshock Prize, Repairing Our Planet, telling the inspiring story of the 5 great missions of the Earthshock Prize, which I'm going to hand over to Colin Buttfield, director and co-founder of Studio Silverback.
The whole idea behind Studio Silverback was that it's not just one company in the UK telling stories about the world. It's a network of people all across the world telling the most important stories about the SDGs and telling it in their way. But thank you so much for recognizing what we've done, and I hope I can work with many of you going forward in Open Planet and other projects.
So the final winner is Neste, nominated by ICIS and Cirium, part of LexisNexis Risk Solutions. Neste is a company dedicated to increasing the proportion of renewable energy in the world's energy mix. They achieve this by producing and selling low-emission renewable fuels, particularly for road transportation and aviation. I will now hand over to Matt Cutler, Commercial Lead Sustainability from ICIS, to tell us about why he nominated Neste and the work they're doing to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
There are 3 areas that I'll focus on, and these are climate action, clean energy, and biodiversity. In line with SDG 15 and very relevant for the topic of today's event, Neste is dedicating to protecting biodiversity and aims to achieve a nature-positive value chain by 2040. I'd like to thank the team at Neste for supporting these extremely important initiatives and thank RELX for hosting today.
I think we all can agree that birds are a beautiful and inspiring entry point to rethinking our relationship with the natural world. We welcome David Fox. He's the chair of the African Bird Club, a charity dedicated to conserving African birds and their habitats. David is also a trustee of the African Conservation Foundation. Now retired, he previously worked as a lawyer for the UK government as well as in private practice.
To date, the African Bird Club has raised almost £600,000 sterling to fund more than 320 conservation projects by local people in 48 countries and territories. But we will keep on achieving more through collaboration than we can accomplish by working alone. And it's a pleasure to be speaking to you today about our partnership with the Birdsong Project, who made a guide to the birdsong of Western Africa. This is the 3rd volume in a series of albums inspired by the song of threatened birds. For our part, the African Bird Club helped select the 10 bird species whose songs are featured on the album. These are listed as critically endangered, or vulnerable on the IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species, with habitat loss and illegal trade being the main threats that they face. All profits from the sales of the album, music streaming, limited edition posters and t-shirts have been donated to 3 organisations working on the ground to protect those and other bird species. A combination of beautiful music and inspiring birdsong can help keep the bird songs alive for future generations.
Coming up shortly is an interview with the CEO of the African Wildlife Foundation that will dig into the current conservation efforts to protect vital ecosystems. But first, we have our thoughts on the day from YSG. YSG is an international business and thought leader in the publishing, education, and information solutions industries. As chairman of Elsevier, he works directly with key stakeholders in government, academia, and industry to support over 30 million scientists, students, and health information professionals. In his role as Director of Corporate Affairs for RELX, Elsevier's parent company, YSG is responsible for government affairs, corporate communications, and corporate responsibility across all 4 of the group's market segments.
This year's event is dedicated to building a platform that would make the vast topic of biodiversity conservation accessible to all of us. The message is very clear. We face a monumental challenge. As of now, 97% of global biodiversity loss is caused by us, by humans. Consider this. Wildlife populations have plunged by an average of 69% over a period of just 50 years. Over that same period, freshwater populations have fallen by an average of 83%. This status quo is grim, but all hope is not lost. Together, we are spurring collaboration across industries, sectors, and country lines. As leaders in climate reporting, RELX is devoted to minimizing the negative impact our missions have on ecosystems around the world. Yet, we need to go further. We have to lead the way in collaborative efforts to preserve ecosystems and combat the loss of biodiversity. Nature is our ally for creating long-term sustainable growth. We must learn to treasure this partnership. So on this note, it was my great pleasure to interview one of the leading industry experts in the space of African biodiversity cooperation and conservation. Mr. Kaddu Kiwe Sebunya, who serves as the CEO of African Wildlife Foundation, is leading the vision of an Africa where human development includes thriving wildlife and extensive wildlands as a cultural and economic asset for Africa's future generation. So first, for our audience, can you tell us a little bit about the current state of biodiversity in Africa? And maybe you could tell us about what you and your team at the African Wildlife Foundation are doing in response to those most pressing challenges that you face.
Africa still holds 30% of the biodiversity. On the global scale, this puts us ahead of so many continents on our planet. But we are, however, at a very, very tipping point. And this is driven by the ambitions of development aspirations that are tearing apart and further emphasizing our need for conservation on the continent. There's a dire need for conservation, but it's mainly driven by the urgent need to address the mindsets that are driving the change on this continent, and the mindset that is shaping the way conservation is being done on the continent.
So I can hear the emphasis from you about the importance of having the African voices at the table in fighting against all sorts of, conservation, anti-conservation action like destruction of habitat or the decline of wildlife.
First, we believe that in every dollar we spend in conservation, we have to spend $2 in the surrounding communities and people to secure the $1 we are spending in conservation. This is into community economies and livelihood ecosystems. But also it's a cheaper model for sustainable conservation in the long run. We focus on mainstreaming conservation in decision-making by linking it to people well-being, by centering people in every work we do. Now Africa has a conservation plan, not so much different from all these international agreements. So now we need just to buy into the African plan and hold Africa accountable. So that's what is meant by the African voices, and it's so critical. Communities in Africa means 70% are below 30 years old. How we interact with young Africans, who are the most educated Africans this continent has ever had. We need to find a way of bringing young people in the conversation. They are the majority on this continent. They are the leaders of the future. They are the custodians of our biodiversity and our heritage. And our results in conservation are so futuristic that the people who are going to live in the future need to get involved straight away.
You seem to be very positive about, advocating these changes being good and not leaving anyone behind. So thank you so much for spending time with us.
So we're going to have a panel discussion starting shortly about biodiversity and native wisdom, and it will then be followed by a choice of roundtable discussions. Both of these are going to be hosted by Pineapple Sustainable Partnerships as part of the launch of their new think tank on accelerating action and investment in nature. Our moderator is going to be Andy Dewis. Andy founded Pineapple out of a passion to solve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by creating new business models that can positively transform markets. He develops Pineapple's impact, growth, and partnership strategy by connecting up all things sustainable.
We've got this session now, which is really designed, we've got an amazing panel, and it's really designed to help everybody here to sort of take a step back, to look inside themselves and to think, what can I do? What can I do to take action, positive action towards nature and biodiversity? I'm now going to hand over to Helen, who's going to give us a bit of a traditional introduction to this session. I'm going to go through each of the individual panelists to introduce themselves. So, Helen, take it away.
I am carrying the lineage of the Sami people from the north of Sweden. So I just want you now, in this moment, to close your eyes, take some deep breath, and feel into the heartbeat of our mother, the earth.
Thank you, Helen. That was an amazing opening and an amazing introduction. And now we have the rest of the panel who have arrived. So welcome. It's been a privilege actually spending time with you guys in the build up to this. I'm excited.
So yeah, Sasha, I am the CEO of Conservation Without Borders, also ambassador for the Convention on Migratory Species, but more remarkably, I'm known as the Human Swan for an expedition that I carried out in 2016. I've been asked to help a load of scientists get together and figure out how to get lots of different people from different interest groups and industries together who were partly part of causing the decline of a migratory swan, and see if I could get all those people to meetings.
My name is Keivan Macedo. I'm the Sustainability Director for Naturinco, a beauty group that gather 4 amazing beauty brands: Natura Cosméticos, which is the mother company of the group, Avon, The Body Shop, and also Aesop.
So my name is Jessica Wawu. Coming across different cultures, I discovered that there is a universal foundational truth in human nature, which is rooted in nature. And I do this covertly as in my work as transition guide and team coach with my colleagues at a company called Dutch Leaders, and overtly with the initiative of Tribal Wisdom, which is a foundation that I started 70 years ago.
How can we take inspiration from traditional wisdom to foster a closer relationship with nature?
First of all, I want to say that we all are origin. There's this indigenous knowledge that we all carry inside of us. And then we have the indigenous people that are tribes, community, that are lineage holder from the ancestors. How can we find ways of solution that are sustainable by diversity and not walking against nature, walking with this cycle of life? And with that, we say in my community, we don't take more than we need.
I've learned a lot. I mean, my upbringing was in the Australian bush, and but also across different cities in Europe. But yeah, my time dropping into different communities has given me quite a different picture. People that have tried to manage nature reserves for a long time know this well. I found myself addressing a large group of land managers and asking them what they'd like to be able to look back on proudly at the end of their careers. And one of them in his 60s, been managing a piece of land since his 20s, stood up and said, I'd like to undo everything that I've done. In my lifetime, we've peeled fences around nature. We've called that nature reserves, and now people think that nature doesn't belong anywhere else.
Normally, also, when we are talking about sustainability, we just came to our mind about the environmental dimension, the social dimension, and the economic dimension. But we do consider that there is the fourth dimension regarding the cultural aspect. And I remember once I was giving this class in one of the universities here in the south part of Brazil, and then I was mentioning all these names about those biodiversity active ingredients that we use, and I was asking the audience, does anyone knows about it? And there is a little girl in the behind of the auditorium. She was the only one that every time that I mentioned those biodiversity ingredients, she was raising the hand. And in the end of the presentation, I asked her, where are you from? And then she mentioned, from the Amazon.
You can start with your elders, the people who have been on this planet longer than you have. And what was beautiful, what I also heard is that instead of maybe acquiring more knowledge, we can look at what can we unlearn. Listening, I would say, is a key. Thank you, Helen, for bringing that up as well. Listening is a key to becoming inspired, because in the similar line as unlearning, this is taking a step back and observing, but also it's more about feeling than about thinking.
We have an incredible panel who's going to be engaging you on policy perspectives on biodiversity. It's going to be moderated by Dr. Michael Coleman, the Senior VP, Research Networks and Academic Ambassador at Elsevier, and also former President of the International Publishers Association, where he now chairs Inclusive Publishing Literacy.
I'm very happy to introduce my panel. We have two stellar panelists. First is Dr. Lin Lee, who's a Senior Director, Global Policy and Advocacy at WWF. And then we have a renowned journalist called Daniela Chiaretti, who's also has been in the trade of journalism for, I think, more than 30 years. So welcome to both of my panelists. Both policymaking and storytelling are, of course, incredibly powerful when you need tools to protect biodiversity. So, Daniela, let me start with you. So why do you think storytelling and journalism is so important in this race to conserve nature?
We are losing biodiversity. So it's very sad to think that my generation could be the last one to see a rhino, a living rhino or something. It's horrible. There is also an ethical issue on this question. That is, we don't have the right to make damages in biodiversity, in the oceans, with the animals, with the plants. I think we have a moral. We, like human beings, have also a moral issue here.
Yes, and a moral obligation, right?
Exactly. Yes. Thank you very much.
That makes complete sense. And Lynn, so we talk about storytelling, but for you, of course, it's very much about policy making. So tell us a bit more about how policy can have a big impact on biodiversity.
So all the trends of biodiversity is going down. Well, same time we see the emission of climate going up, which is totally the wrong trend. We need to see the different trend. We need the biodiversity to recover. We need carbon emission to go down. And that, from the angle of policy making, is critical, because individual organization and sometimes even individual country cannot do that. But then the government making policy, both domestic and international, need to really give the right signal for all the players in the society, be it the business, civil society, financial institutions, individual and organizations, and all together need to give the fundamental shift in giving the signal of our finance system, our behavior, our food production system, so that we can bring the biodiversity back. We cannot destroy the home, the only home we have in the universe that sustains us. And this has to be changed. Well, policy making has a biggest role to play, I would say.
I was happy to have this global framework at the end, because this puts everybody in the same direction. But this is only the beginning. The battle starts now with the implementation, how to do it, and where to do it, how to start, and everything. So I'm again optimistic that we should have more awareness of people. We should try to explain to people in a more sensitive and easy way why this is important. We should to put this story closer to people at home. This is an effort I'm doing, my colleague journalists are doing also.
We have to stop thinking that we can have unlimited economic development on a planet with a finite natural resources. So that is a choice we have to make as individual, as organization. Without nature, we have nothing. And without nature, we are nothing. So nature is for all of us.
We cannot negotiate with nature. So I think this is also important.
It is time for the one amazing, incredible, all-round awesome Dr. Jane Goodall, and she's going to be introduced by our very own fantastic Dr. Márcia Balisciano.
It is my great honor to introduce Dr. Jane Goodall DBE, Dame of the British Empire, who is an ethnologist and environmentalist, founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, and a United Nations Messenger of Peace. Dr. Goodall braved a realm of unknowns to give the world a remarkable window into humankind's closest living relatives. Through more than 60 years of groundbreaking work, she has not only shown us the urgent need to protect chimpanzees from extinction, she has also redefined species conservation to include the needs of local people and the environment. She has received many awards and honorary degrees, too numerous to count, and is one of humanity's greatest voices. Dr. Goodall.
I think all of you listening understand perfectly well that we're going through pretty dark, grim times. And that's politically, socially, and of course, as we're talking about now, environmentally. We've got climate change and loss of biodiversity, and these two are intricately linked. And I've so often find climate change is being discussed with less emphasis on biodiversity. But we have to realize that a lot of what's gone wrong is our disrespect of Mother Nature. And we must all realize that we depend on Mother Nature for food, water, clothing, well, everything. But what we depend on is healthy ecosystems. So with all this and more, how do I have hope for the future? Well, for one thing, there's a growing awareness about all of this. And then there's four main reasons that I have other than that. First of all, the human intellect, the resilience of nature, the indomitable human spirit, and the energy and passion and action of young people. I see humanity now as at the beginning of a very long and very dark tunnel. And at the far end of that tunnel is a little star shining. That's hope. But it's no good sitting at the mouth of the tunnel and just hoping the star will come to us. Hope isn't about wishful thinking. It's about taking action. So we have to crawl under, climb over, work our way around all the obstacles that lie between us and that star. But unfortunately, so many people are working in silos. We need to collaborate. We need to work together. We need to bring people from different sectors together. And only in that way, I think, can we hope to move into a better future.
And I wondered how you think countries should walk the talk, particularly around some of the set pieces like COP15.
I know exactly what you mean. There's a lot of promises made at these big events, and they're certainly by countries, and they're certainly not always kept. If we go right back to the Paris Agreement, you know, countries did not live up to what they had promised with regard to emission reduction. And those that seem to have lived up to their target were mostly countries that offloaded their dirty industries to China and India, who won't take those anymore, thank goodness. So What we have to have is a tolerant government, and we have to have politicians who really care, and we have to have people electing them, the ordinary citizen, who will support politicians if something is proposed which will help the environment but may cost a few pennies more. Humanity is not exempt from extinction, and the world is a right mess at the moment. And of course, modern industrialized warfare is having a terrible effect on the environment and on biodiversity. So it's a question of getting this information out there. And that's why I'm spending so much of my time growing this Roots and Shoots program, because young people are changing their parents. And if parents really think that all this is going to affect their children as they grow up, they're going to try and change their ways. Think a little bit about Indigenous voices, how so many Indigenous people made decisions based on how will this affect future generations, that we have to somehow change this mindset, which is pretty selfish. And we have to remember that every single one of us matters. Every single one of us, and every single one of us makes some difference on the planet every day. And we get to choose what sort of difference we make.
From the start of the day, we've had a scribe in attendance, just as we did last year. I'm looking forward to see what it is like this year. And it's from Terry from Scriberia.
Yeah, I hope this image reminds everybody what has been discussed today.
I'm delighted to introduce next Mick Sheldrick. He's the co-founder and chief policy and government relations officer at Global Citizen. For the past decade, the campaigns have led to over 35 billion distributed to anti-poverty efforts around the world.
But what I want to talk a little bit about today is the intersection of climate change, nature, biodiversity, and why it's still not too late for action. But looking back to 2015, when the world came together for these watershed moments, I really look back from this spirit of, some might say nostalgia, some might say, this sense of global solidarity. And it was really this moment where it showed that the world was able to come together and set these ambitious goals around the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on climate change. And so for our part at Global Citizen, we've been campaigning, we've been urging governments to get together, but also recognizing the role of the private sector as well. And we've been urging businesses to look at, okay, well, cutting carbon emissions is good for people on the planet, also makes good business sense. Let's continue to demonstrate the evidence. Let's continue to set science-based targets, publish transition plans, demonstrate evidence around that transition. But let's also see how businesses can also contribute to the transformative investments that's needed in developing countries. It's sometimes easy to lose hope. But I was speaking to Tom Karnak last week, who worked with Christiania Figueres when they put together the Paris Agreement in 2015. And we were reflecting on the sentiment that led to that, because I think, as Nelson Mandela said, everything always seems impossible until it's done, and then it's as if it was inevitable. It wasn't the Paris Agreement that led to hope, right? One didn't follow the other. He said, it was having hope in the first place that was necessary to create the conditions for the Paris Agreement. And I think that's a telling reminder that despite everything we've seen over the last few years, the division, that hope that actually the world can still come together around key agendas, as we've seen on biodiversity, is something, as Jane Goodall will say, worth fighting for.
And now it is time to hear from Sanda Ojiembo, the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations Global Compact, to comment on the current state of nature and the SDGs and whether we are on track for the 2030 timeline.
As you've heard today, it's not too late for nature. There's still time to protect and restore the the vibrant ecosystems that nurture and sustain us. But the clock is quickly running out, as almost 1 million species are at risk of extinction, and our forests, our coral reefs, and our wetlands are approaching a dangerous tipping point. According to the World Economic Forum, half of the world's total GDP, $44 trillion, is moderately or highly at risk due to nature loss. The 2022 Global Risk Report ranks biodiversity loss in the top 3 business risks, behind the interconnected dangers of climate action failure and extreme weather. The adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework last December at the UN Biodiversity Conference, COP15, was a crucial step. But if we are to prevent the world's worst impact on nature loss, we will need bold advocacy and decisive action from the global business community. We will need business leaders across sectors and industries to prioritize biodiversity as part of their long-term sustainability strategy. Public-private partnerships and collaboration between all stakeholders will be key to these efforts. As Dr. Jane Goodall has often reminded us, we must not give up hope. Every person, every business has an impact on nature. We must decide together what that impact will be.
So finally, from me, thank you once again. Thank you to Shola. Thank you to everyone. It's been a fantastic day, and let's go forward and do even more to advance the cause of biodiversity in our work.